A machete lay beside a freshly planted cassava field, its blade still glistening with blood. Elena Ruiz had vanished, her final voice message ending with a scream that would never be heard by the university administration. They would find her thesis papers scattered across Professor Ngweso's plantation office, red marks slashing through years of research she would never defend. At Kisangani University, ambition could be a death sentence when it challenged the wrong people. Chancellor Mukendi deleted another email that morning, concerned inquiry from Elena's parents in Colombia, wondering why their daughter hadn't called in 3 days. Outside his window, students gathered in small clusters, their whispers growing louder as Zawadi moved among them, a flash drive clutched tightly in her trembling hand. It contained the truth about what happened to her roommate, the evidence that would ignite a campus. By sunset, a riot would erupt, but the system had already decided which bodies would be buried and which careers would be protected. Welcome to True Crime Inquiry, where we uncover the darkest corners of institutional power. I'm your host, and today we're exploring a case that reveals how academic prestige can shield predators from consequences. To our returning subscribers, thank you for your continued support in amplifying these crucial stories. To new viewers joining us, this channel is dedicated to exposing injustices that powerful systems work to conceal. This story takes us to Kisangani University, where a brilliant graduate student named Elena Ruiz challenged more than academic theory, challenged a protected professor's authority, and paid the ultimate price. What follows is not just a murder investigation, but an examination of how silence becomes institutional policy when funding and reputation are at stake. Kisangani University is as a beacon of academic excellence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, its colonial-era buildings draped in ivy and prestige. From the outside, the campus appears to be a sanctuary for intellectual pursuit. But listen closely to the footsteps echoing through its marble corridors, and you'll hear something else beneath them: whispers. Professor Gabriel Ngweso occupies the corner office in the Department of Political Economy. His door displays an impressive collection of credentials, PhD from London School of Economics, visiting scholarships at prestigious European institutions, and most importantly, his signature on over €4.2 million in research grants from the European Union. These grants fund not only his department, but also provide the financial lifeline that keeps the university's international standing intact. Every semester, his advanced seminars attract ambitious students from across the global south, all hoping to study under his renowned methodology. What the university brochures don't mention are the unwritten rules about Professor Ngweso's classes. Female graduate students are advised by their peers to avoid meeting him alone. Teaching assistants develop an informal buddy system for after-hours consultations. When Chancellor Mukendi walks the administrative hallways, he carefully avoids acknowledging the pattern evident in dropped courses and transfer requests that consistently emerge from Ngweso's department. Elena Ruiz arrived at Kisangani in September 2023, a brilliant mind from Bogotá, Colombia. At 25, she had already published 2 papers on economic development in post-conflict societies work that caught Professor Ngweso's attention during the application process. Her scholarship was a life-changing opportunity, the culmination of years of academic dedication and her family's sacrifices to support her education. She was always the first one to arrive at the library and the last to leave. Sometimes you'd find her surrounded by stacks of research papers, translating economic theory across 3 languages. She believed her work could make a real difference back home. What Elena couldn't translate were the subtle warnings from her peers. Cultural barriers and her focus on academic excellence left her vulnerable to the predatory dynamics that had been normalized within the institution. By November, Professor Ngweso had added her to his prestigious research team, an honor that came with private meetings to discuss her exceptional potential. In the faculty lounge, Professor Amina Cohn once raised concerns about Nguesso's pattern of behavior with Chancellor Mukendi. The conversation ended abruptly when Mukendi reminded her of the upcoming renewal deadline for the university's largest grant. The EU Research Committee values stability in their partner institutions. So he knows it's in their best interest not create unnecessary problems that might jeopardize our funding priorities. By December, the university had received and dismissed 2 formal complaints against Nguesso from previous years. The paperwork disappeared into administrative archives, accessible only through a complex bureaucratic process designed to discourage further inquiry. Meanwhile, Elena's thesis work, a groundbreaking analysis of gender equity in post-conflict economic development, progressed under Nguesso's increasingly controlling supervision. What no one realized was that Elena had begun documenting every interaction. Her laptop contained password-protected voice recordings of meetings where academic discussions gradually transformed into inappropriate personal comments, unwanted touches, and eventually explicit propositions disguised as career opportunities. The system that Chancellor Mukendi had carefully maintained was about to face its greatest challenge: foreign student who hadn't yet learned that at Kisangani University, some truths remained permanently unspoken. Elena Ruiz's research diary, recovered months after her disappearance, reveals a gradual shift in her academic experience. The early entries overflow with intellectual excitement, detailed notes on theoretical frameworks, ambitious research questions, and gratitude for the opportunity to study at Kisangani. "Professor Nguesso challenged my methodology today," she wrote in October. "His critique was harsh but fair. I need to strengthen my empirical approach if this work is to create real change." By November, subtle changes appeared in her writing. Meeting notes increasingly documented location changes from department conference rooms to Nguesso's private office, then to off-campus cafes where academic discussions mysteriously extended into evening hours. Elena initially interpreted these meetings as special mentorship from a distinguished professor taking interest in her work. Her roommate Zawadi Mutombo noticed the shift before Elena did. She would return from these meetings looking drained, not intellectually stimulated. When Zawadi asked questions, she would say that Professor Nguesso had concerns about her theoretical framework, always concerns that required more private consultation. The power dynamics crystallized during an international conference in Nairobi, where Elena presented preliminary findings from her research. Her presentation received enthusiastic responses from scholars across Africa and Europe, attention that visibly displeased Nguesso, who had accompanied the Kisangani delegation. That evening, he requested an urgent meeting in the hotel restaurant. He placed his hand on mine and said my success depended entirely on his endorsement. Elena recorded in a voice memo found later on her encrypted cloud storage. He said, "European universities only accept African research when it comes with the right connections." Then he suggested we continue the discussion in his room. When Elena declined, citing professional boundaries, Nguesso's demeanor transformed. The following week, he reassigned key parts of her research to another graduate student, a male doctoral candidate with significantly less expertise in her methodology. Elena's academic isolation intensified methodically. Conference invitations mysteriously disappeared from department announcements before reaching her inbox. Library resources she had reserved became unavailable. The collaborative atmosphere among graduate students chilled as word spread that Professor Nguesso had concerns about her academic rigor. The final academic execution came during her thesis defense in April. Despite meticulous preparation and groundbreaking findings, Elena faced a hostile committee dominated by Nguesso's departmental allies. Questions focused not on her research contributions, but on arbitrary methodological details outside the scope of her work. They weren't evaluating my thesis. Elena wrote that night. They were punishing my resistance. The committee failed her defense, requiring a complete restructuring of her thesis, effectively erasing 2 years of work and threatening her scholarship funding. Desperate but determined, Elena contacted Women in Academic Solidarity, an international feminist NGO documenting patterns of abuse in educational institutions. I need to create an external record, she wrote in her email. I fear the university has no interest in addressing this situation. What Elena couldn't know was that the university's IT infrastructure, funded by the same EU grant supporting Nguesso's position, included sophisticated email monitoring software. Within hours of sending her message, Nguesso had been notified of potential reputational threats to the institution. The system designed to protect Kisangani's prestigious image had just placed Elena directly in her predator's sights. The email to Women in Academic Solidarity triggered an automated response that appeared in Elena's inbox at 7:42 p.m. Thank you for your courage in sharing your experience. A case manager will contact you within 48 hours to discuss documentation protocols and support options. Elena never had the chance to read this message. At 8:17 p.m., Professor Nguesso sent a text that would change everything. I've reconsidered your thesis defense. Perhaps we've been too harsh. I'd like to discuss a potential path forward for your research. Can you meet tomorrow at my plantation? The university environment has too many ears. Elena's last voice memo, recorded in her dormitory room at 6:03 a.m. the following morning, captured her conflicted thoughts. I don't trust him, but I need this degree. My family has sacrificed everything for me to be here. I've come too far to return to Colombia with nothing. I'll record everything on my phone and meet him in a public area of the plantation where workers will be present. Zawadi doesn't think I should go, but she doesn't understand what's at stake. Security camera footage from the university's main gate shows Elena leaving campus at 9:15 a.m., carrying her laptop bag and a file of documents. A motorcycle taxi driver later confirmed dropping her at the entrance to Nguesso's cassava plantation, approximately 17 kilometers from campus. The plantation, a 200-hectare property inherited through Nguesso's political connections during the regional land redistribution of 2010, employs seasonal workers who typically concentrate in the southern fields. The northern section, where Nguesso maintained a private office in a colonial-era building, remains largely isolated. Employees later reported being instructed to work exclusively in the southern fields that particular day, an unusual directive that left the office area completely deserted. What happened inside that office can only be reconstructed through forensic evidence gathered weeks later, after Zawadi's revelations forced an investigation. The blood spatter analysis suggests Elena was seated when the attack began, likely strangled from behind while reviewing documents at Nguesso's desk. Defense wounds on her hands indicate she briefly fought back before losing consciousness. The desk chair, later recovered from a deep gully 2 kilometers away, contained traces of Elena's blood and hair. Soil analysis from the office floor revealed drag marks leading to the rear entrance, where tire tracks matching Nguesso's private vehicle were documented. The most disturbing evidence came from the plantation's northeastern section. Using ground-penetrating radar, investigators located a recently disturbed area beneath newly planted cassava. Buried 2 meters deep, they discovered Elena's remains. Her body intact, but her head separated, a methodical approach that forensic anthropologists noted indicates not panic, but calculated disposal. Most chilling was the discovery that Elena's laptop and phone had been systematically destroyed, smashed, burned, and buried separately from her body nearly half a kilometer away. Yet Nguesso's methodical destruction overlooked a critical detail. Elena's cloud storage, which continued silently uploading audio recordings until her phone's battery died. The final recording captured only ambient sounds, papers shuffling, Elena's voice asking about her thesis revisions, a chair scraping across wooden floorboards, and then the sound of footsteps moving behind her. The recording ends with sudden movement, a gasped intake of breath, and then silence. By that evening, Chancellor Mukendi had already received Professor Nguesso's email explaining that, regrettably, the Colombian student had failed to appear for their scheduled meeting to discuss her academic future. Zawadi Mutombo arrived at her dormitory room after an exhausting coding lab to find Elena's side of the room untouched since morning. Elena's meticulous nature made this immediately concerning. Her bed remained unmade, a half-finished cup of coffee sat on her desk, and most tellingly, her research calendar showed a highlighted appointment 10 a.m. North Plantation, bring all thesis materials. When Elena failed to return by midnight, Zawadi tried calling her phone. The call went straight to voicemail. She sent messages that showed as delivered but remained unread. By morning, with Elena's absence approaching 24 hours, Zawadi approached the university's security office. Zawadi recounted how the university wouldn't even file a report. The officer said graduate students often disappear for days during research crises. He suggested Elena had probably gone to clear her head after her failed defense. This dismissal catalyzed something in Zawadi, a second-year computer science student who had been developing encryption protocols as part of her own research. While lacking official authority to investigate, she possessed something potentially more valuable: technical expertise and intimate knowledge of Elena's habits. Elena's laptop was missing, but Zawadi knew her roommate maintained rigorous backup protocols after losing research data during a power outage months earlier. Each night, Elena's devices automatically synchronized with an encrypted cloud storage services system that continued functioning regardless of what happened to the physical devices. The challenge was accessing this data. Elena's accounts were protected by complex passwords that even Zawadi didn't know. However, three critical factors worked in Zawadi's favor. She had observed Elena's typing patterns for months. She possessed advanced understanding of credential recovery systems, and most importantly, she knew Elena had programmed emergency access protocols into her backup system. For 3 days, Zawadi worked methodically through potential password combinations based on patterns in Elena's known credentials. She analyzed linguistic tendencies in Elena's academic writing, identifying recurring conceptual frameworks that might inform password construction. On the 4th day, a breakthrough came when Zawadi realized Elena structured her most secure passwords around obscure Colombian revolutionary figures combined with statistical values. The system unlocked, revealing a meticulously organized digital archive. Among academic folders and research data, Zawadi discovered a directory simply labeled Insurance that contained audio recordings, dozens of voice memos documenting every interaction with Professor Nguesso. The files were arranged chronologically, showing the escalating pattern of harassment, coercion, and ultimately, threats. The final recording from the plantation visit remained incomplete, corrupted during upload, when Elena's phone lost power but contained enough to establish her presence at Nguesso's property and the beginning of their conversation. More damning were the earlier files, which clearly documented Nguesso explicitly threatening Elena's academic future if she continued refusing his advances. "If I say you're academically inadequate, no institution in Africa or Europe will accept you," his voice stated clearly in one recording. "Your career exists because I allow it to exist." Zawadi's technical training had taught her about evidence preservation. Before taking any further action, she created authenticated copies of all files, generating cryptographic signatures that would verify the recordings hadn't been altered. She then methodically extracted and compiled the most explicit threats into a single, undeniable timeline of predation. The question she now faced was not just technical, but ethical. What to do with this explosive information in a system designed to protect predators like Nguesso rather than victims like Elena? The answer came when she discovered a final folder labeled Protocol, containing detailed instructions Elena had created in case something happened to her. Elena's Protocol folder contained explicit instructions. If she disappeared for more than 72 hours, the evidence should be released anonymously to 3 specific entities: the student newspaper, the University Board of Trustees, and the European Union Research Funding Committee. Zawadi hesitated, still hoping her roommate might return with an explanation. By the 5th day, campus security had finally logged a missing person report, but their investigation focused primarily on Elena's personal relationships, rather than her academic conflicts. On the 6th day, Zawadi enacted Elena's protocol. Using the university's computer lab and a series of anonymizing networks she had studied in her cybersecurity coursework, she distributed the audio files alongside a detailed timeline of Elena's interactions with Professor Nguesso. The files reached their destination simultaneously at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, precisely when most students gathered in the central courtyard between classes. The evidence spread like wildfire. Students huddled around phones and laptops, hearing Nguesso's threats in his own voice. The recordings left no room for misinterpretation as explicit demands for sexual favors in exchange for academic advancement, his threats to destroy Elena's career, and his boasts about previous students he had taught to cooperate. Most chilling was his reference to making problems disappear when discussing another female student who had filed complaints against him years earlier. By evening, a spontaneous demonstration had formed outside the administration building. Students held up their phones, playing Elena's recordings at maximum volume so the sound echoed across campus. When darkness fell, they switched to the flashlight function, illuminating the building like hundreds of accusatory eyes. Chancellor Mukendi's response came swiftly, but not in the form of justice. Campus security, supplemented by local police, dispersed the gathering using tear gas and batons. The university's IT department implemented an emergency protocol blocking access to cloud storage sites where the recordings were hosted. An official statement characterized the audio as manipulated content designed to destabilize the university's reputation. The most calculated response targeted Zawadi directly. University administrators traced the file distribution to the computer lab and used surveillance footage to identify her presence during the critical time period. Within 24 hours, she received formal notice of expulsion for misuse of university computing resources and dissemination of defamatory materials. Meanwhile, Professor Nguesso temporarily stepped back from teaching duties for what the university called a previously scheduled research sabbatical. When local police, pressured by student activism, finally investigated the plantation, they found freshly tilled soil throughout the northern fields. Forensic teams arrived too late, and the evidence had been thoroughly disrupted by agricultural maintenance. The European Union Research Committee sent representatives to investigate the allegations. Their inquiry concluded with bureaucratic precision, noting concerning but inconclusive evidence of ethical violations, while recommending enhanced oversight mechanisms rather than funding termination. 3 months later, Professor Nguesso resurfaced in the capital as a special advisor to the Ministry of Economic Development. Zawadi, her academic career destroyed, returned to her rural hometown. Chancellor Mukendi continued leading the university, introducing a new digital communications policy restricting unauthorized recording on campus. Elena's body was eventually discovered only because heavy seasonal rains washed away enough soil to expose her remains. The official cause of death was listed as homicide by person or persons unknown, despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence pointing to Nguesso. The most damning indictment came from Elena herself. The final page of her journal, recovered from her cloud storage, contained the words that would become a rallying cry for ongoing student protests. "They'll never let a foreigner break their system. To our loyal subscribers, new and old, thank you. You followed us into the abyss, where the line between angel and monster dissolves. But before you smash that like button, share this video, subscribe if you haven't. Because monsters don't hide under beds, they hide in plain sight. And this channel, we expose them. Ring the bell, never miss a story that claws at the veil between sanity and sin. And remember, the next time someone says, "Trust me," ask yourself, what's the skeleton in their cupboard?